discussion evolved into looking at a few things. One is that can we handle these arbitrary Boolean combinations? And would some sort of formal methods approach be helpful in that? And the other thing is that their training method does depend on these specially trained, like specially obtained vectors at the output of the CNN layer, right?
Correct.
And we were thinking, you had expressed that there might be some doubts as to whether the training will generalize beyond the particular data set that they use. Right?
Yeah. So there, okay. So post that, I mean, at least one paper I have seen which sort of tries to extend that, but I was never too happy with that actually, which is they do that, but they also implement what they call layer-wise relevance. So something called LRP. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a very simple idea that you want to sort of assign to pixels in your input some kind of importance of how that particular pixel is towards the classification. Yeah. So what you do is, okay, you can imagine a fairly simple network that you're writing up. Just think of it as a simple neural network if you want. Yeah. And suppose the penultimate layer results in so basically almost always you do cross entropy right at the last layer, so which means that there is a bunch of values that you have, as many as the number of classes typically. Yeah. And then you classify the thing by the maximum that you see there. Mostly that is the way it is done. Now what you do is you take that, so, and suppose you got it correct. So then what I could do is the following. I can look at so what they do, so I can then propagate the number that I will get. So suppose that class that has been classified correctly. Okay, then what I could do is I could look at all gates that are feeding into that particular class in the final layer. Yeah. And they all have a bunch of weights on them, naturally, to train the model. So what I can say is, okay, this number that I have written down there is because I have taken some linear combination of weights of neurons, which are fitting into it. But I know the weight of every edge there. So therefore I can say, okay, to get this number, therefore I require, you can now think that, okay, this, you take a particular edge and then say, what is its contribution to that final thing? It is the weight of that edge divided by the weight of all the other edges which are feeding into that node. Right.
And something like absolute value would probably have.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And they propagate it backwards in some sense.
Right.
Yeah. And one can imagine that you can calculate these things, and this is what is called layer-wise relevance. Yeah. So anyway, so there are multiple things. One big problem with this prototype training layer, ProtoPNet, is that the kind of sort of hardware you require to train it is just enormous.
Okay.
That is one big bottleneck of that. I mean, in the sense, how do you sort of, how do you get hold of decent prototypes is just not clear to me. How do you get hold of decent without extremely, without doing things which are computationally intensive? Okay, so that is one. So, trying to align it closer to what you have been doing, which is basically testing for some kinds of invariance. No? That's what you are looking at, right? Testing invariance, as in, so you have a network which is, and what you are doing is calculating what is the real tolerance of, say, rotations that it can handle and so on.
Right. And sort of we do that by sort of propagating sets of states as opposed to, so like you take the allowed set of states is one input and the rotated copy of that input, and you propagate it forward through the network while keeping some representation of the sets of states, because sets of vectors you can get.
Yeah. Okay. So, and basically what you set up is finally a SAT formula, which you actually, and then some constraint SAT is what you actually set up, right?
Yeah, so in my particular case, I think at the end of the day, it's not coming to be a SAT formula. What I end up reducing it to is much simpler. In since it's an LP formula.
It's an LP formula. Correct.
Right. But yeah, in general, I think that is sort of the idea. Like, yeah. I mean, even if we like sort of step away from what precisely I'm doing.
That's correct. In his case, for this invariance property, his contribution was that although one of the steps to propagate this will kind of require some SMT calls, okay, trying to eliminate most of it. So it's mostly LP calls.
Right. And like LP calls over very few number of constraints, so that each call is somewhat fast.
Okay. And so, but have you tested these? So one question which I had asked you that time during your thesis presentation itself, have you looked at this for these equivariant networks? Have you actually evaluated whether equivariant networks?
What networks?
So these are these networks which are meant to be equivariant in the sense that networks which are trained to have equivariance properties with respect to a certain group action.
So I am sorry, but I've not like tested this.
No, so I was just, I mean, so what I.
But yeah, I think it's like.
Maybe I think. I mean, maybe okay. So two suggestions I have. One is that in the next 1 week we meet some 2-3 times so that we zoom in on something. Meanwhile, what I think what I should probably do, I mean, this requires some very elementary group theory, but that is very easy to teach actually. It's not difficult at all. So what they are really doing, if you wish, I could quickly run you through one of those, through the main paper, actually, the paper which introduced it. Then actually even Muthu worked on it and we had a very simple neural network which we designed, which actually also maintains some decent invariance. Yeah. And I can, but their training procedure is very different. So they train the network so that the features learn.
How do you ensure? You said we ensure invariance. Okay.
Yes. So I'll tell you.
How do you ensure?
That's what I'm trying. That's what I'm getting to. So what you want to do is you want to train the network so that the features learned are invariant under transformations of the input. As in layer by layer, you're going to learn features so that if I transform the input in a certain way, the features that are propagated are actually in some sense the features that are transmitted from a layer to the other, from one layer to the other layer, are what are called equivariant features. Okay, so that I can explain to you. It's a very simple idea. Yeah, and this is the way
in these kinds of networks, this equivariance property holds good at every layer, is it?
It is at every layer. At every layer. It is meant to be at every layer, but of course, a lot of it you will achieve only after you do a lot of augmented training. You will not get it in the beginning otherwise. Okay. So what I could do is maybe I could quickly run you through one of the papers and or I'll pick up.
That would be a good thing. But just I want to make one observation. If indeed that some invariance or equivariance, the way you put it, is expected to every layer is expected to be true at every layer, then it makes this checking even easier. Okay.
Okay.
That is definitely the case because in the sense that the motivating assumption behind this was that like we would have some sort of equivariance holding for the features in the intermediate layers, as opposed to somehow the entire network being invariant without there being some invariance.
No, I understand that. But if they are kind of in equivariant, no, maybe this is a tangent, okay? But I mean, but you were checking invariance only between input, between the relation to be expected to be true between output and input. Okay, so there is it is not. We were thinking, okay, these things might behave, have an invariance property of output to input, even though it may not be true for at the hidden layers. Correct. Now,
Yeah.
whether it is true in practice or not, that's a different thing. But this, I mean, we were trying to prove it. We never made the method of proving invariance in our case never relied on the fact that that invariant property had to hold good at every layer. That's all. That's the limited point I'm making. Okay. So to that extent, if by training this property is expected to hold good at every layer, then I can decompose my verification at one layer at a time, okay, instead of propagating the whole thing. So, yeah. So in that sense, I said that it is even easier, but nonetheless, it might still be interesting to prove these, if indeed they hold good at every layer, and it holds in relation to the entire output when compared to the input. Okay. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. 1 minute. So let me need some time. Let me.
So I think in some sense, this decomposition that you're mentioning will get done, like as in the tie classes that we'll get will reflect the invariance holding in the intermediate layer, and we'll see this decomposition at like
yeah,
when we just even run
your
this
method. If you use your method, if they're expected to hold good, probably the tie classes will be nice. Okay.
Right. Yeah, and then in that sense also it will be easier.
That is
what
correct. I'm not saying that you should not use your method.
No. I'm just saying.
Is the verification complexity is, is a lot more when you have to prove end-to-end property. Correct. So, if the DNN is expected to satisfy this invariance property at every layer, then I'll show it for every layer. Huh?
I'll just pull it.
And probably use even little plus.
Yeah, maybe.
It may be scalable. I don't know. But nonetheless, how effective your method is, this would be an interesting case. Yeah.
Okay, so should I share it and should I just quickly run you through that? Because my feeling is this is perhaps if you want to, because invariance, I am convinced that over time, this will become an extremely important, and it is not as if people are not doing this. People are really, people now believe that if you design equivariant networks, if you design your networks to be equivariant, then in some sense, actually the classification is more robust also. Yeah, and use of these networks also is probably, of course, what invariant features it is learning is still a mystery. Now, whether one can explain this whole business using prototypes, can one say that? I don't. Those are completely independent questions, I think. Yeah. So let me do one thing. Let me quickly share, and I'll start explaining to you this. Yeah. So I think it might be useful to just take a look at it. Yeah, sorry. You'll have to.
So I think, sir, you'll have to give me some.
Yeah, we'll do that. But before you start sharing, explaining that, just at high level, Diganta, you might also bring up, since
I'll do that. I'll actually
the other thing that we discussed.
Right. So I think I thought that I'll just do it at the end, but there was this another sort of like, if I remember from our discussion, we had sort of come to another possible line of problem, which is that in some sense generalizing this explainability work of this, it looks like that, so that can we actually do away with prototypes?
Correct.
Can we somehow just by if you're just given a CNN with let's say one like feedforward layer at the end, can we then just from that derive some sort of coverage criteria for a particular classification, like saying that, okay, look, if you're going to classify this like if you're going to classify something as say of a particular class, it is going to be given by a linear combination of certain kinds of vectors at the output of the CNN layer. And then we can maybe try and backpropagate those vectors through the network and say that those sets of vectors or those combination of vectors corresponds to certain sets of images where we see some combination of a particular feature. So we might say that, okay, look, we're going to classify something as say a stop sign only if we see these few images or some perturbations of those few images.
Okay. And
Right,
how
so-
does also what was the idea of propagating the what vectors would you propagate? So, okay, so you go to the penultimate layer, you're saying.
Right.
And suppose you're looking at a bunch of stop vectors, stop images, is it?
Yeah. So one of the things is that if we can at the penultimate layer, the region of feasible or region of feature vectors which will correspond to say something that gets classified as a stop sign, it's going to be something like a polytope, right? Because it is going to be the inverse image of some inequalities propagated across a linear layer.
Okay. Okay. So assuming that the sort of so you are assuming that the final sort of classification, that's the surface that you get, is given by a bunch of hyperplanes. That is not always true. No? It could be some strange polynomial also. No? The regions could be sort of the regions that you might get. I mean, imagine you're on a sphere and you draw multiple sort of large circles and you subdivide the sphere somehow.
Right.
Then the regions that you get are not describable by hyperplanes, but by polynomials, certainly, by certain kinds of polynomials. You can say this.
Okay. So I so what I'm saying is sometimes if we look at when do we say that something is getting classified well, say let's say that we have 3 classes, and when do we say something is class 0? It's when the score of class 0 is greater than 1 or 1 and 2, right?
Okay.
And let's say that the last layer is just has only ReLU activation functions.
Okay.
So then for class 0 to be greater than 1 and class 0 to be greater than 2, if we propagate it through the ReLU, the input of the ReLU also class 0 has to be greater than 1, class 0 has to be greater than 2.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And now we have sort of these two linear conditions. And if we ask, what does that tell us about the input to the last linear layer now, let's say, that like we have a linear layer, we have some linear conditions, we're going to basically have to take the pre-image of bunch of linear constraints across a linear map, which will also be a bunch of linear constraints itself.
Okay.
So in that sense, what I'm saying is, if the architecture is something like some convolution layers followed by a linear layer followed by a ReLU, let's say, then all of the feature vectors which lead to a classification of class 0 right before the last linear layer, which means right at the end of all of the convolutional layers. So all of the feature vectors which leads to class 0 at that point, they will form a polytope. So they will be given by a bunch of conjunction of a bunch of linear constraints.
Okay.
So now what I'm saying is, can we somehow sample this polytope, pick certain vectors and some neighborhoods around these vectors, and then propagate those neighborhoods backward through the CNN layers?
Okay.
So each one of those neighborhoods, each one of those points will correspond to an input image, and each one of those neighborhoods will be some epsilon perturbation of that input image. And if we can do that, then we can maybe say that, okay, anything that gets classified as class 0 will be either this, like some epsilon neighborhood of this image, or an epsilon neighborhood of this image, or an epsilon neighborhood of this image, and so on.
Okay.
So this is I think somewhat completely different from the invariant properties, but
Correct. Yeah.
right. But
This is
I was
just a better way of either guaranteeing, guaranteeing what is called as robustness properties than what people have been able to do.
yeah. So it seems that right now within like or at least the best sort of neural network analysis tools, they're looking at robustness properties, and it's because for things like say road sign detection, an adversarial attack can be very fatal. Right. So if you can rule that out or give some guarantees of having that. Anything else?
Okay.
Yeah. So then
Okay.
Yeah, and also when they verify the robustness, they verify with respect to a candidate image. Okay.
Yeah.
So for which it say there is a set of candidate images, for which it returns correct results. It returns correct results. You pick that, and then you perturb the inputs.
So this is the currently what people are doing.
Currently, more people are doing.
Okay.
And that is.
That is, so these are what are adversarial robustness. No? That's what.
Yeah. But when people are verifying against adversarial robustness, they're not verifying it for any general input. They're only saying it's robust for an epsilon neighborhood of this particular input.
Correct.
So then the question becomes, how do you choose these candidate inputs? Right? Because I mean, maybe I can choose them from my validation data set, but when it's out in the wild, we might get some completely different image, which somehow still is classified as say 50 km/h road sign, and we have an accident. So this might be able to, if we can actually get this to go through, this might be able to give us a entirely different perspective on how to look at safety for neural networks, which is that we will not start with a property, but let's see what sort of classification this network gives, and then see if that makes sense. So we sort of get the region that this class network will classify and see if that is within our tolerance.
Okay.
But this has nothing to do with invariance thing.
Right.
No, this has nothing to do with invariance, excepting this is this is, as you said, more robustness.
Right.
The network is what you are trying to, in some sense, certify.
Yeah. And I mean, not even robustness in the sense of adversarial robustness, because again, that is with respect to one correct classification.
Correct.
This is slightly more global in some sense.
Yeah, but there was also another thing that you.
Yeah. So I mean, so that is I have another sort of perspective on this particular thing, and that is so one, an ideal way to do this would be a proper safety characterization, that okay, the network will classify something as class 0 only if this is within some epsilon neighborhoods, right? But even if we can't get this exact, can we say this up to some probability? Right. But then of course, if you want to say something like that, it might be easier to come to such conclusions. But the question becomes, when we say probability, what do we mean? What is the distribution? So I have no idea how to approach that, but at the same time, I feel like it might be easier and still useful enough as a property if we can show this even up to some probability. Like we say that, okay, 99% of the time, something that is classified as class 0 is the epsilon neighborhoods of one of these 100 images. So even that, I think.
Okay, so if one is, okay, so now, okay, so there are, okay, so let us take the first question itself, because that is already hard.
Right.
So if you are looking at the first question, and as you said, suppose, so basically, I mean, when one is looking at the landscape of the region, the final region that you get, I mean, it is of course broken up in some sense into a bunch of disjoint regions, and there are a bunch of regions which are classified as 0, a bunch of regions which are classified as 1, and a bunch of regions which are classified as 2, and so on. That's the way it probably sort of breaks up. Now, somehow you are trying to identify within those. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine that problem in a slightly different way. So now you're saying, okay, there are these regions that the space has been broken up into. And we are so this is in the final layer. I mean, it is. So when I'm looking at and now what you want to do is to identify. You want to pick up these things. You want to sort of approximate them, let us say, by some kind of linear sort of regions. And now you want to propagate these backwards and identify them with certain actual honest inputs. Is that what your suggestion is? Your suggestion is with respect to inputs, right? Finally,
right.
I mean, you are going to say that, okay, there are, no, I mean, I just want to understand that finally, when you say that I will classify something as this, if it is in the epsilon neighborhood of.
Is making the claim that that's how it is. I mean, you're saying that, is it that way? I mean, is the final classification some kind of a disjunction of, is it expressed that way normally?
As a bunch, yeah, I mean, it is reasonable to say that the final classification is really taking the space and partitioning it in some way, because and things which are right somewhere in the middle of that are going to be, so you'll be fairly robust in your classification of images which are in the middle of the regions.
Right.
So because what will happen is that the space will get partitioned into multiple regions. But multiple regions, maybe your class 0 is split into maybe 10 different components. That's possible. Class 1 might have 3 components. Class 2 might have 5 components. And things which are in the boundary are the real headaches, because you can move them by some small adversarial noise into the other region. And those are the real ones. So
yeah,
all your
just one moment. I had basic license, okay, because Krishna got to upgrade me. I mean, he did upgrade me just now, okay. So this meeting will end in 10 minutes.
Okay, I probably have a proper license, so I can even license. I can set up something.
Okay, in which case then you will have to start the meeting.
Yeah. Let's finish this. Don't worry. I'll just send you anyway. Oh, but this guy will not allow me to. I think. Let me just see. Anyway. Yeah. No. So that is the usual way of understanding robustness. Is that there are these regions, and I'm really adding noise to push this image from this region to adjacent region, or in a region which is whatever, 2 components away, something like that. So then your adversarial noises are typically found that way. There is no magic going on there. It's very clear what they are doing.
It's just something in the boundary.
Yeah, something in the boundary which you're pushing. Yeah, and so things which are in the interior of the region will, of course, you will classify them reasonably. Yeah. So now what? No. So let me.
So what I'm saying is, even if there things in the boundary, we can slowly make a small perturbation and push it in. What I'm trying to find is a bunch of honest inputs whose epsilon neighborhoods I know are always classified as this particular. So there is this one particular classification which I don't ever want to make via some error, right?
Correct.
Let's say that the classification is you're free to go, like a go sign or something like that, right? We don't ever want to classify a road sign as a go sign unless it is actually go, right?
Correct.
So if we have such a class, then, and if I have a bunch of honest inputs and I say that, okay, look, if you're classifying something as a go, it is definitely an epsilon neighborhood of these honest inputs, right?
Okay.
So that means I have a region which contains the space of inputs which is classified as O, as a union of epsilon balls. Let's say. So then, there might still be adversarial examples which are very close to the boundary of this region that is classified as Go, which if you make some very small perturbations, before that it was not being classified as Go, but after a small perturbation, it is being classified as Go, right?
Correct.
But they'll still fall inside one of our epsilon balls. And if we can generate these epsilon balls, then, and if the number of these epsilon balls are small enough and the epsilon is also tight enough, then we can ask a human that, okay, look, these are say some 50 images, and some perturbations of this that gets classified as a code, right? And if we know that for sure, then we would be able to say that, okay, look, even if you have some adversarial attack, that is still going to get certified by this human, right?
Diganta, I don't think we should get into so much detail. I just wanted to give him the three broad things that we thought that we discussed.
Right. Yeah. I think maybe
But there was one other thing, no, to give it.
No, I think there was two things. This one and
No. How about the other one, like FFT thing or something that is where you.
I don't. Yeah, I think at some point we talked about framing.
So those are related to invariance actually, because
That's right.
that you learn are really some kind of Fourier transforms, but not on abelian groups, but on non-abelian groups. Okay. So that is what happens in those things actually.
Right. So when you present that, then that will be.
Oh, that'll come in, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So why don't you?
I'll just set up a meeting and send you the link anyway.
Correct. Okay, then you show the paper. Yeah.
They're asking.
Shall I end this meeting?
Password. 1 minute. I've not logged into Zoom for some time, looks like. So I need to give them a password suddenly. Check your email, it says. 1 minute. Yeah. So now, okay. I'll just put it in the chat. Link is in the chat. Okay. Just copy the link.
Yeah. So will I join that?
Yeah, we can join that. Yeah.
I have to end this meeting.